Good afternoon, sir. Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon. Only 4 students have joined till now. So let us wait couple of more minutes, then we'll start.
Recording in progress.
Yes, we can start now. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. So yesterday we had a discussion on post-colonialism and colonialism related to post-colonial studies. So I hope that the basic concepts are very much clear to all of you. About what post-colonialism is and what colonialism is. So actually, now at this level, it can be well argued that such a territorial conquest and expansion, which basically forms the basis of colonialism, it has been observed that throughout human history you can see. So as we have observed, even the British capital of London was once a colony of the Roman Empire. British capital of London, it was also once a colony. So doesn't this make the history of colonialism really the entire history of humanity? This is a question for the researchers. Okay, that you have another perspective to look at. Well, it may be so, but as far as post-colonial studies is concerned, the focus is on the kinds of colonialism that have emerged since the 16th century and that have been, you can say, primarily guided by the profit-making motive of capitalism. So we will be talking in this relation between colonialism and capitalism later on, because this is also very important aspect. We cannot leave it. Okay, there are so many features of colonialism and post-colonialism. But before that, we will also try to understand post-colonialism in relation to literature. Because when we talk about this post-colonialism, definitely, post-colonialism involves a studied engagement with the experience of colonialism and its past and present effects. That basically, as a student of literature, as a researcher, we are doing that. And in that, we give post-colonialism, which is basically largely connected with the power, position, or hegemony, such as many of us, many scholars of post-colonial literature, they think like that. We also, you can say, have a opinion that this, it may be possible to study post-colonial, in the in as I mentioned yesterday in my talk that how it is a sum total of cultural, social, political, and economic aspects they must be considered, and how cultural impact of these colonies are here in India. I just would like to invite one discussion. I just want to quote by, there is a quote by Jomo Kenyatta. Okay, Jomo Kenyatta. I'm audible clearly. All of you are able to listen me properly.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
So according to this, when I quote, when the missionaries came, the Africans had the land and the Christians had the Bible. They taught us to pray with our eyes closed. Try to understand the significance of closed eyes. They taught us to pray with our closed eyes. When we opened them, they had the land and we had the Bible. Got the point? Quote is clear? Or should I repeat? When the missionaries came to...
Sir, repeat it once again, please.
Yeah.
So whose quote is this?
Jomo Kenyatta, Jomokanyatta, Jomo Kenyatta. When the missionaries came, the Africans had the land and the Christians had the Bible. They taught us to pray with our eyes closed. And when we opened them, they had the land and we had the Bible. This is purely in African context, and those who have gone through the Chinua Achebe's, epoch-making novel, Things Fall Apart, they can well understand that how, actually this is a fiction, of course, but it is very much connected with the history of Africa. So in that sense, it becomes very much relevant. So yeah, I invite discussion. What is your opinion? What do you think about this? Any one of you can proceed. What is your observation? Because in research, observation is very important, that how you look at particular things. What is your, point of view?
So when they entered our premises, because we were also colonized by the Britishers, so when they entered our premises, they were showing that superiority over our caste, creed, and religion. So that is how, and even few of the Indians, they were also quite indulged into these sort of like, they also wanted to adopt Christianity, and they also wanted to like they considered this English to be a superior language. Therefore we were taught this English so that their task become easy to give us orders, and our task was like we get superiority in their group, that being an Indian, they were giving us titles, they were giving us titles, and they were giving us privilege, giving few Indians privilege, and they were teaching us English just because, so that we can create that disunity amongst us. Like it was a sort of disunity which was being created. Indians were only creating this sort of disunity because of this English and their religion and customs which were being told by them to follow. So
yeah, true.
This is what.
Yes. So, here one thing we are very much clear when we just observe it. First, before that, I would like to quote Leela Gandhi. Okay. According to Leela Gandhi, in just one famous book on post-colonial study, writes, colonialism does not end with the end of colonial occupation. Resistance begins before the end of colonial occupation. the historical, whereby the West attempts systematically to cancel or negate the cultural difference and value of the non-West. Try to understand. West attempts systematically to cancel or negate the cultural difference and value of the non-West. Okay. Now, if you have observed colonialism, actually the governance of non-European places by European administrators, how it has been done through economic, political, and military modes. Okay, at gunpoint also they have, you can say, they posed the things. Another, the study of non-European culture by European academics. This was something very important to look at. Why? Here entire narrative has been changed. The study of non-European cultures by European academics. Do you think here they have done justice with the European academics? The European texts, manuscripts, what they have studied? Okay, so European academics, scholars, scientists in anthropology, literature, different religious studies, they have done so. And the slow transformation of native societies where missionary work, European education system, bureaucracy, and just you look at in current situation, you find that all of us are very much in grip of this. Just completely in a strategic way, in a planned way, we have been trapped. So these 3 points are very important. Why? When we opened eyes, because this post-colonial studies, it got its you can say force well, only after in 1980s. Before that, you find that Commonwealth literature, third world literature, generally we study. And before that, when we talk about theory, new criticism was very much, when we interpret the text, new criticism, that was, at primary focus. So these things we have to clearly understand. Only then we can understand the logic that they have handed over, Bible to us, and they have captured our territory. Okay, so, and another important thing which I mentioned here, the question which you need to just ponder over, that is, Western academics, when they look at our texts, how proudly we say that there is a Kumbh going on in Prayagraj or in Nasik, and Western scholars, they come over here, and we say that Harvard is doing research on this. But no, this is not. They are actually projecting negative image of our culture. They portray about Nagas. They say that still they're living a naked life. This is India. Okay, so this is what we have to understand narrative. Okay, how they actually portray us at international platform, which even you see so many scholars. When you can take the example of V.S. Naipaul, Neeraj C. Chaudhary, they have written from the very colonial perspective, India Wounded Civilization. The very title, what does it mean? India Wounded Civilization by V.S. Naipaul. It's a very famous work. So we have to understand their strategy, how they have damaged our well-established legacy. Even in certain sources, I'm unable to quote the exact source, but in some articles I came to know that before English they came to India, the literacy of India was almost 99%, or you can say 100%. In every village there was a school, but how systematically they have damaged entire education system, because only they can rule, only then they can rule. You study in social sciences that are in history about world civilization, how several civilization came to an end. Invaders come and attack, they have just killed all the people. those who followed, they imposed their culture, their language. Even in Christianity also, you might be familiar with Alexander Pope, that because he used to follow Catholic, he was a Catholic, and because of his religion, he had to just leave London city. Because William and Mary, when after this glorious revolution, they actually imposed a certain belief. These people can live in London. Can you imagine in England in just in 1700? So that is why there is a famous poem, just Ode on a Solitude by Alexander Pope, that study. So he also faced this exile, okay, which is also very important concept in post-colonial study. Yeah. So
So this
when
post-colonialism had also been made quite clear in that Chief Seattle speech, because
yeah,
I was going through that speech. In that particular thing, the Red Indians leader, he told that how this Washington big father, like he had made this quote that that father wants us to follow their religion, and they think
yes,
that
yes,
their God is there. So that thing is making the entire speech quite effective, as we can see through this post-colonial aspect. That is making it quite more
yeah.
clear if we read it, if we go through it.
Yes, 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 of course. So, when we analyze all this from this post-colonial lens, then immediately all these things become very clear to us, that how, when we study a text written by European academics about India, even, you see such an impact we can observe in our life, that you see, we see several job advertisement in English medium schools that only convent educated are preferred. Okay, if you're not convent educated, you won't get your selection over there. Okay, and how in schools, we force students that you have to speak in English only. From just uh, primary classes. Okay, so but simultaneously with language, we are also transferring, they carry culture. When you adopt the language, you adopt the culture also. That is why you see that several festivals, Halloween, so people are so just crazy for this. Christmas, even this New Year. Okay, so lots of things are there. So when we talk about this cultural aspect, we find that how it has been in a planned way imposed, or we have accepted. And when it comes to narrative by Western academicians, so that is also not done honestly. That is why, even in our especially, I would like to mention here Hindu texts, okay, religious text, like Ramayana, uh, most authentic source is Valmiki Ramayana, okay. But and in that there is not Uttarkand, okay, where this exile of Sita and all these stories. It is said that this is an interpolation. It has been added later on, because they have Western academicians, they have studied our own text, and this happened long back. Even you see here Nalanda, just university, long back at that time, around 20,000 scholars all over the world, they used to come and study here. But how such a just culture which has such a so many great scholars, how it has been destroyed systematically. Okay, so this was part of policy of these invaders. So we have to understand very clearly what Leela Gandhi says, what you know different features of colonialism. Actually, here we have to understand very clearly that post-colonialism does not emphasize a new technologically advanced media world. Okay, it emphasizes the importance of the cultural, economic, political, and military dominance of the past. And you see, the absence of non-white images in the media visually suggest the dominance of white culture. You just look at. We see advertisement that a girl which was having dark complexion, so she is not selected, but when apply Fair and Lovely, immediately she gets job and all this. So psychologically, what it is transmitting, what we are getting. So somehow we have to understand that how these things, that is why we have to understand entire politics. And these, in post-colonial studies, we find that this entire strategy, it has been encountered by the scholars. Well, so here we say that actually these colonies, including India, Africa, when they became independent and set up their own governments, okay. But here you can also present an argument that much of the culture of the imperial countries, okay, still lingers on those, the former colonies as a reminder of the colonial rule. And the process of decolonization has not prevented the Western powers from tightening their economic grip on the rest of the world. And that is why you see the wealth of economically developed countries increasingly depends on the cheap labor and raw material. And that is supplied by the third world, in which all these, developing countries or these colonial countries, they are very much dependent. That is why, when you study this post-colonial theory, you'd find what, the major themes which you see, that is a power, control, identity, race, okay, nations and nationality. These are very important aspects to be explored, to understand, because when we study, we come to know are certain questions which come to our mind about that we think about Eurocentrism, we talk about universalism, we think about somehow that how this colonialism has been, this entire process of colonialism has been justified. The theory of Rudyard Kipling, which he has given in his poem, that is white man's burden. Actually, what was thought to be an obligation to civilize non-European people, and it has been justified, even with the military force. So, but there are so many factors are to be considered. Political oppression, economic, social, cultural oppression, psychological oppression. So how the colonized was oppressed? That is why you see post-colonial theorists believe that the colonizers in Europeans impose their own values, okay, on those colonized, so that they were internalized. How? In terms of social, cultural aspect, religious aspect, and still that practice is very much going on. So now another question can come to our mind: how we can how did the oppressed are escape from this situation? Because post-colonial theorists also analyze the entire processes by which those who were colonized resisted the colonizers. Okay, you see in India, South Africa, and other colonies, after colonization, you just you can observe the language, culture, what language we speak, what culture we follow, hybridization and double consciousness, awareness of culture before colonized and during colonization. And what emerged out of that, you see, particularly post-colonialism, it represents like culture as a stereotypes. Western culture has often defined at itself in relation to other of non-Western cultures. We sometimes say that Western culture is people are following Western culture. So what is that Western culture? And we find easy also. So it would be better here to actually two things are very much related here to discuss. One is Commonwealth, another is the concept of hybridity by Homi Bhabha. So I think we should, because we are talking about culture, so we should talk about hybridity, the concept which Homi Bhabha has given. Okay. Actually, you see, we will when we talk about post-colonial literature, and our starting point in this exploration is the concept of hybridity. And this concept of hybridity actually plays a very important role in Bhabha's work. And you see, before we understand the writings of Bhabha, we have to know that what he was. Actually, Homi Bhabha, he was from the Parsi community of Bombay, and completed his graduation from Bombay University. And before moving on to the University of Oxford as a postgraduate, he started his teaching career in UK. But subsequently, you see, he moved to America, where now he holds the Anna F. Rothenberg Chair Professorship in Humanities in the University of Harvard. Actually, when we just look at the personality of Bhabha, he has been often regarded as a part of the Holy Trinity in the field of post-colonial studies. Okay, with the other two figures, Edward Said and Gayatri Chakravarti Spivak. Homi Bhabha, Gayatri Chakravarti Spivak, and Edward Said. These are very important, theorists who really contributed to post-colonial studies to a great extent. You see, his most influential work of post-colonial theory is the collection of essays titled The Location of Culture, which originally was published in 1994. Later on, there are a number of important works Bhabha produced, like The Black Seven, The Dark Princess, on global memory, beyond photography. But he is very famous for his work, The Location of Culture. And I would like to mention here that when we have a colonial discourse, we have seen how colonialism is constructed by the Europeans. Okay, how? As a civilizing mission. In which the superior culture of the metropolitan West comes in contact with the inferior culture of the colonized periphery. Try to understand. This entire colonial discourse is very much connected with how Europeans, they constructed, or they have started their civilizing mission, in which they actually they introduce their superior culture of the metropolitan. Okay, and which came into contact with the inferior culture of the colonized. Okay. So this inferior binary actually indicates that in spite of colonial contact, the culture and civilization of the Western colonizers and of the colonized, colonized East, are perceived as two distinct and separate entities. And this perception is most clearly evident in the opening lines of Rudyard Kipling poem, The Ballad of East and West. Oh, East is East and West is West, and never the twain shall meet. Okay, so this notion, this idea of distinct cultural essence, separating the colonizers and the colonized, also informs the kind of middle class nationalist discourse that we have studied earlier from within the Indian context. It is a, you can say it is a cyclical pattern of fall and recovery that underlines the nationalist discourse. And also the notion of distinctive and pure cultural identities. Okay, because we have seen earlier, that Mahatma Gandhi, for instance, India under the colonial influence has lost its distinctive culture and its native inhabitants, because its native inhabitants are busy imitating the culture of the colonizers. Try to understand. Those who are the natives, they are imitating the culture of the colonizers, which is completely aligned to them. But in the cyclical pattern underlying the Gandhian nationalist discourse, the notion of return and recovery, therefore, signifies a very important aspect of civilizational values and pre-colonial past, which represent an era of cultural purity. Here, since we were talking about Homi K. Bhabha and his concept of hybridity, actually, when we talk about Bhabha's concept of hybridity, we have to understand that very clearly that this hybridity is basically, it is a new transcultural form, and it arises from the cross-cultural exchange. Got the point? It is a transcultural form, arises from cross-cultural exchange, and now it comes in a different form. It can be social, it can be political, it can be religious. Okay, it is not always a peaceful mixture, or it can be conflicting. It can have just a poor experience. Actually, it is a cross between two races or two different cultures. Hybridity is basically a cross between two races or two different cultures, and there are two definitions as a for example, the experience of several ethnic groups interacting and mixing with each other, often in a contentious environment that gives way to new forms of identity and experience. Okay, the experience of several ethnic groups interacting and mixing with each other, often in a contentious environment that gives way to new forms of identity and experience. Another aspect is that societies that arises from a mixture of ethnic and racial mixing to form a new material, psychological and spiritual self-definition. Okay, so here you can say, after all, we can say it is a remix. It means two different things are mixed with each other. For example, nowadays we are wearing kurta with jeans. It's a very common fashion. So it is one type of hybridity. We can see it everywhere in fast food, in clothes, in festival, in marriages. So many cultures they have mixed up together, and people are happily following. Huh? All of you might have observed this in your surroundings when you go. Even not observing, we are also following. Any question, any counter, anything while discussion came to your mind, you can just say.
Sir, I have one question.
Yeah, please, Vinay.
Mikhail Bakhtin's theory of polyphony, is that related to hybridity?
Actually, when we talk about Mikhail Bakhtin's this polyphony, what do you understand with this polyphony first? Can you explain this?
Yes, sir. Mikhail Bakhtin's theory of polyphony explains that a particular work has.
No, don't explain the Bakhtin's theory. You tell me the polyphony is what?
Yeah, polyphony means double voiced.
Double voice.
Yes, sir. Just like a novel has a two voice. One is characters, one is authors.
Actually, when various things here, the word polyphony is very significant in post-colonial study also, because somehow when you look at this, here we find it talks about multiple voices. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Multiple voices, and when multiple voices they merge together and they just come up with something, with some harmony, something beautiful. Okay, so this concept of polyphony is somehow when we, because polyphony in generally this is a term which we use in music. Okay, where we see that so many different kinds of music simultaneously they are combined and produce some beautiful melodic some tone.
Yes, sir.
So here in hybridity what we see,
So I think that hybridity and polyphony are not same, because in hybridity the culture of the colonizer and the yes.
Let me explain first. Okay, don't reach to any particular, literature is always open for interpretation. Never be judgmental in literature. Always come up with various, you can say, various logic. That is why so many research papers are people just, writing on this. Okay. So never come to a conclusion. You look at from the different, because Mikhail Bakhtin was really important theories and discourse, provides a very important discourse in 20th century literature, and actually, especially in the field of social sciences. And he just, when he was talking about, this structural aspect, he was actually structural, and that structural discourse he provided. If you look at Bakhtin's work, actually you find that there some classification according to several structure. His works are tend to be very elusive, repetitive, and there are some others important features also which we find. And this, when we talk about this polyphony, okay, what question he asked. So I don't say that it is exactly the same.
Yes, sir. It is somehow related to it.
Yeah, but you can make a comparative study with this, and literally when we go for polyphony, it literally means multiple voices.
Yes, sir.
Literally it means multiple voices, and Yes. So we were talking about this polyphony and Bhabha's hybridity. So yes, come up. What you want to say? Yes, Vinay. Vinay, over to you.
I just wanted to say that it is not totally related to the hybridity, but it is we can say it is somehow some elements of polyphony are similar to the Bhava's concept of hybridity. Is it, sir?
Yeah, you can say because when according to Bakhtin, when he talks about this, he says definitely these voices are merged together, but each has its own you can say particular view. Okay, so in that sense you cannot say. So now you come up with the theory of Bhabha. Actually, what Bhabha says. Yeah, let us listen. Some counter also was there. Somebody was saying, please come up, you also.
Yes, sir, I was saying something.
Yeah, sir.
Sir, I think that hybridity is characterized by the mixedness or the interconnectedness of the. It may be the mixedness of the cultures or the languages, but the polyphony is concerned with the language. In most of the cases, polyphony is concerned with the language of the
That is why I said that when analysis is basically structural based. Okay.
Yes, sir.
But we just the sense which is being communicated, that we have to understand, because in hybridity also, when we adopt different culture, we have something. Even in today's time, all of us, we can look at ourselves, that how hybrid can we say that we are fully Indian or fully Western, huh? So many things we have adopted from this. Okay, so area is of course different, but somehow we can make a comparative analysis of both the aspects. Okay, well, just a minute. Yeah, so actually the problem with the effort to create a class of colonized people who are exactly like the colonizers is that if the project were ever to succeed, okay, then it will erase the assumed cultural gap between the superior colonizer and inferior, as I mentioned that how when they interacted with superior, because British culture is very dominant, very strong, language as well as culture. Okay, so they used it as a tool to influence. So the inferior colonized and you see then later on undermine the colonial rule itself. According to Bhabha, though the colonizers wants to colonize the mimic him, he never really expects the later to catch up. Okay, so the mimic men of the colonial periphery are therefore, from the perspective of the colonizer, ever remain people who are not quite not white. But Bhabha points out that this very idea of a lesser human being mimicking the superior colonizer, it is also, you can say, and what would be, you can say, this the idea of a lesser human being mimicking the superior colonizer. So it also turns the act into a sort of mockery of the superior colonizers' culture. The best example is when you see Mulk Raj Anand's novel, that Untouchable. Baka, he's a fond of, he wants to become, just like, and he wear such kind of dress, and his friends, they just often make fun of that and says, Pilpili Sahab. Huh? They says to Baka, Pilpili Sahab, when he just wears the dress of English people. So you see, it is something like a gesture or a clown picking up the manners of save gentlemen, and then repeating it after him in the most exaggerated and comic manner. So now let us again return to in order to understand the cultural hybridity, how it impacts the concept of a nation state. I think it has already become obvious to you that a notion of culture as a changeable and a dynamic process characterized by hybridity of various elements is fundamentally inimical to the idea of nationalism and the socio-political structure of a nation state. Because when we talk about the nationalism, I have today just gave you two study material. One is Frantz Fanon's The Wretched of the Earth. So chapter 4 is you have to study national culture. Okay, that is in your syllabus, and which I will take up in them. And another research paper where colonialism, anti-colonialism aspects are described, that I have given. So all of you must study. That will be the part of our discussion in the next week. Okay, well, so here when we talk about this hybridity of various elements, why it is fundamentally inimical to the idea of nationalism? Because when we look at the socio-political structure of a nation state, we find that the idea of a nation is ultimately defined by a cultural essence, and that culture is unique in itself, especially to the people who are resident of that country, that territory, that in that within its political boundaries. But when this they adopt other cultures, so somehow this idea weakens. So with the nation, we are back somehow at the very problematic idea of cultural essence, static cultural essence. But if we do it without this, and think from the very lens of cultural hybridity, then what kind of social organization other than the nation state can be conceived? This is a question. You can think. If we just remove these cultural aspects and look at through this lens of cultural hybridity, so the first important aspect, for the important question is, what kind of social organization other than the nation state can we conceive? Must think, all of you. So the answer is perhaps best given by famous writer Salman Rushdie, and in his essay Imaginary Homelands. Actually, he presented argument that and also made us look at ourselves not as a grounded in any one particular national culture or another, but as displaced beings who are living a life of an exile. Because the world around us is seeing an ever-growing number of human displacement. Okay, and the human movement due to war, natural calamities, political persecutions, economic aspirations, so many things are there. Just I would like to give my example here. I know I belong to Uttar Pradesh, UP. I'm settled in Odisha. I'm not familiar. I don't know Odia language. Okay, if I stay here for more than 15-20 years, when I would go back to my native place. So what, and constantly I have this feeling I don't belong to this place. I don't belong to this place. Anybody who leaves his native place, constantly he used to feel, or she feels, I don't belong to this place. This is not my native place. And after a long gap, when goes back to his birthplace, then everything is changed. Just like Okunko, in 7 years everything changed in Igbo community. And at that time another idea comes, means the same idea, you belong to this place but no one is there. So somehow you remain in a start, there is a quest for identity crisis, which we study. What is my identity? So several examples are here in post-colonial studies where you can look and you can understand. You would find very well that these concepts are very interesting to understand. And since we are talking about Bhabha's concept of this hybridity, so when you ask this question, those who are living a life of exile, actually, according to Rushdie, even if we are not physically displaced, all of us are displaced in time from the glorious national past that we might want to go back to. It's a very significant remark by Rushdie. We are not physically displaced. All of us are displaced in time from the glorious national past. Namwar Singh, in his essay, Decolonizing the Indian Mind, he mentioned very clearly when he talks about this nationalism, that during the freedom struggle in India, there was this sense of nationalism, but after independence, this character was something lacking. And another aspect, you see that there is so many scholars. One I would like to mention, Rajiv Malhotra. He mentioned in his this talk that India is lacking a national character. Sometimes we feel proud to say that unity in diversity, but when we study from post-colonial perspective and especially from the perspective of decolonizing the Indian mind, okay, what Namwar says. So we find that somehow there is a lack of national character. What is our national character? Okay, so these are important things which we have to understand, which we have to explore. Then we can do really justice with post-colonial studies. Actually, such a mode of thinking might sometimes rob us of our national identities that we have been taught to cherish since childhood. But Rushdie's argument that this is compensated by the fact that we then become an heir to all the cultures in the world, and we can fashion our own cultural identity by mixing the disparate element that the world as a whole offer to us. That is why it becomes very important. Our cultural identity then becomes a dynamic process of transformation and gives us for more agency to shape ourselves and compare to the straitjacket of national culture. So with Bhabha's notion of cultural hybridity, we also have to understand the idea of nationalism, the idea of cosmopolitanism, okay, and because they are somehow very much linked with this. So I hope that this idea of hybridity is clear to you. If any question you can have. Actually, when we have this post-colonial study, So like anti-colonialism, we have to understand magical realism, this hybridity, Orientalism, the concept of race, diaspora. Diaspora is also very important thing. Commonwealth literature. So these are certain terms. Without understanding them, we cannot go for this understanding post-colonial literature in its entirety. Because when we talk about Commonwealth literature, especially if we talk about what is Commonwealth, actually the original phrase, the Commonwealth or the common weal, comes from the old meaning of wealth, which is well-being. So the term this literary term, it means common well-being. Commonwealth means British nation and political community, and founder for the common good. Commonwealth means British nation and political community, founded for the common good, and it deals with public welfare. Commonwealth literature has been generally used to refer to the literature of colonies, former colonies, and dependencies of Britain, excluding the literature of England. You cannot just include the literature of England in it. And commonly it shows the nationality. So after all, we can say that Commonwealth literature means master-slave relationship. It means inferior nations are under the powerful nations. So that is why, when this post-colonial studies came into existence, especially in 80s onwards, that because Commonwealth literature cannot include the literature of all the world. And somehow it has to, exclude Britain, and there were some other aspects also which becomes very important, that I would like to include here. Actually, as we have discussed in post-colonialism, in fact, this term, if you just go back in the history, only in 1980s you find that. In literary studies, it became very popular. But before that, till that time, it was used basically primarily as an adjective to refer conditions or situations that occurred after the end of colonial rule in places like America or India. Okay, so from 1980s and 1990s onwards, during that time, this post-colonialism became very important or integral part, you can say, of literary discussion. And before that, you find only this, post-colonial Commonwealth literature. Actually, as I said, that Commonwealth, what it signifies? Grouping of nation state, which were once colonies of Britain. So the British Empire, which had reached its peak in terms of occupied territory, after First World War in 1920s, okay, it was at the peak. But during Second World War, 1940s onwards, somehow it had started breaking up. And India was in fact one of the first countries to break away. And now the sovereign state, nation states, which basically emerging out of British Empire, and it shares several, incidents, common history of British colonialism. So somehow you see this grouping of nation still exists, and in this you see there is a map which highlights in green countries, which are now the member states of the Commonwealth. Now, if you look at this map carefully, you will realize that not all countries which were once British colonies are now part of the Commonwealth. For example, one very prominent exception that we can see here is the United States of America. It is not there. It is not part of Commonwealth. And if you remember your history, you will know that much of what constitute the United States of America today was under British rule till 1776. 4th July 1776. 4th July is Independence Day of America. So America still celebrates its Independence Day on this date. But this, does not refer, as a British colony. And that is why British colony does not feature in its list of Commonwealth nations. Or you can say it may be an anomaly, or there are many such anomalies which got compounded when the term Commonwealth started getting used in, especially in academic discourse. If we go back in the history regarding this Commonwealth, which you need to understand, actually, it was in the year 1964 when the University of Leeds in England organized the first Commonwealth Literature Conference. And in this effort, the main purpose was to bring under a single umbrella the significant amount of English literature. And that was coming out of, this British colonies. By the time the conference was organized, R.K. Narayan from India, V.S. Naipaul from the West Indian island of Trinidad, Chinua Achebe from Nigeria, were being regularly published in Britain and America. Their names had become a familiar part of English literature. And the literature that they produced was vaguely referred as the new literature in English. Here you have to understand the entire politics. Okay. And the attempt of the conference was to bring authors like Narayan, Naipaul, and Achebe in the limelight and to create a new field of literary studies around their work. And this was to be the field of Commonwealth literature. And the literature that came out of the empire that was now fast dissolving. So just like in the political group of Commonwealth nations, America remains conspicuously absent in the category of Commonwealth literature. And the literature of America was never included. But what was even more curious was the category of Commonwealth literature did not also include British literature, in spite of the fact that Britain as the colonial metropolis was, and is still very much a part of Commonwealth nations. That is why, the Indian, our novelist, famous novelist, Salman Rushdie, while attending another conference on Commonwealth literature almost 20 years after the first conference at Leeds, noted that the category of Commonwealth literature was actually being used to group together the English literature that was coming out only from the ex-colonies. Means literature that was coming out only from the ex-colonies of Britain and not from the metropolis itself. And this was being done so as to distinguish the former as a separate grade of literature, and that was inferior.
I have one question here.
Just a minute, let me
Yes.
finish. So that was
Yes, sir.
inferior from British literature, and therefore as something that needed to be studied separately. So you can well observe that how this thing has been done by Western academia, British, this British academia. It means they have their strategy out of that. Only then, because they have to, third word means third word cannot come in the first word. Who is first word? Okay, you see that there is also argument about writing English. When we write English, we start with the capital E. So capital E, it represents Queen's English. So many writers, okay, writing in English, so they have started using English in small. Indian English, Canadian English, Australian English, American English. Okay. Okay, well, now question. Yeah, what
Yes, sir. So, sir, I was asking that as Salman Rushdie explained, that the term Commonwealth literature is used for the group, which is for the ex-colonies of Britain, right, sir?
Yeah.
So, sir, United States was also one of the British colonies. So, why is it not included in the list?
Yeah, that is actually,
So that yes, sir.
the point which I mentioned this very clearly, that if you go back, in 1776, okay, 4th July, it still celebrates. But actually, if you become the part of that, you carry that very, you accept that British dominance. So that's why they have, especially if you have studied American scholar of immersion. Okay, so Emerson clearly said, now we don't have to look at the West. We have to stand on our own feet. So,
Yes, sir.
they created their own literature. And when, Salman Rushdie pointed out it clearly that it is a part of a strategy to keep us aloof, that all those who were once British colonies, they come together. Okay, so they can easily point out that they belong to that category, new literature in English, or third world literature, or Commonwealth literature. Okay, so it has lots of significance in academia. That is why it has been done, deliberately. So we have to understand all these aspects. Anything else? But I think now whatever points I have included in my discussion, you can understand very well that how that these Britishers are this colonial power in a planned way, in a stead, they have tried to rule us. I think things are clear or not. As again, if I would like to quote this, school, especially education system. Walter Rodney mentioned the main purpose of colonial school system was to train Africans to participate in the domination and exploitation of the continent as a whole. Colonial education was education for subordination, exploitation, the creation of mental confusion, and the development of underdevelopment. Walter Rodney said this. So this is actually the gist of entire discussion, that how how things have been planned and then implemented by these with the different modes, either social, political, economic, cultural, military force, various strategies they have used. Okay, so when you look back and you see, as Chinua Achebe has pointed out in An African Voice, okay, Chinua Achebe clearly said, the last 400 or 500 years of European contact with Africa produced a body of literature that presented Africa in a very bad light and Africans in very lurid terms. The reason for this had to do with the need to justify the slave trade and slavery. This continued until the Africans themselves, in the middle of the 20th century, took into their own hands the telling of their stories. Okay, as you know, we mentioned about Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, that how Africans, they have been presented in a very negative aspects. So that we have to understand entire, this strategy. Okay, so we can say we have to, if we understand these all terms related to either it is a hybridity, or it is a Commonwealth literature, or it is a concept of race, concept of diaspora, because diaspora is also very important, because diaspora is actually the voluntary enforced migration of people from their native homelands. So that is why you see diaspora literature concerned with the question of maintaining or altering identity, language, culture while in another culture or country. Okay, so if you go in detail, you'd find that this term has also a very important role, and actually diasporic writers generally you find in homesickness, and so they write about their homelands and what they are feeling there. So in this type of literature, writer wrote about their country and remembering those days, and write poems or any other forms of literature about it. Okay, like you might have seen so many movies, Swadesh, Swadesh movie, in which Shah Rukh Khan also feel like that, and remember his own country. Okay, so many movies and so many novels are written about this. And this another, you see, the concept of race, the division and classification of human beings by physical and biological characteristics. So this classification, this division is also very important to study, because this term race, it has been used often by various groups of scholar, either to maintain power or to stress on solidarity. Okay, if we can say in simple words, so that race is the division in okay, in Gujarati we can say vada, or you see in the in different context, in animals also we can differentiate the black cow and the white cow. So as the same in human beings also, color of skin is different. So we can say that difference in human beings are everywhere, whether in India, in America, in Africa, etc. But difference is everywhere. So we have to understand that discrimination on the basis of these, on the basis of race, on the basis of ethnicity, on the basis of color, this is it justified? This is my question to you. Anybody can respond.
No, sir,
Discrimination,
it's not justified.
discrimination on the basis of, that is why when you study gender, discrimination on the basis of gender, discrimination on the basis of color of skin, or anything, nobody can accept. But that has been done. If we we study history, we find that this has been done, and that it is very much essential to understand all these aspects. Okay, and before concluding today's talk, I would like to suggest to all of you that you people start reading some research papers based on this post-colonial literature. Okay, this will give you proper understanding. Okay, because in research paper, generally research scholars, they collect information from various places, they give various references, and the basic is that the book which I had given. Okay, so you can start from there. Anything other, any questions which comes to your mind, you may ask. We have last 4 minutes for this session. Actually, if you see, the most radical change in the approach to literary text that distinguishes post-colonial literature from Commonwealth literature is the focus on anti-colonial resistance. Post-colonial literatures focus on anti-colonial resistance. Whereas you see Commonwealth literature was informed by a colonial nostalgia. And post-colonial literature is informed by a highly critical approach towards colonialism. And you see, post-colonial literature is not merely a grouping of literature that has emerged out of the ex-European. Rather, it is a grouping of literature which attempts to subvert and undo the effects of colonial violence. And that is why we find that this critical attitude which informs the post-colonial studies today is the legacy of what I have referred when we were talking about colonialism and post-colonialism. Okay. So that is why you see these concepts are very related one. Yeah, please.
Sir, I have one point to add. So you can also just tell if I'm thinking right or wrong.
Yeah.
So this is displayed by the writer Amitav Ghosh, who refused to let his novel The Glass Palace to be considered for the 2001 Commonwealth Writers' Prize. So is that a kind of aversion that he had in his mind?
Yeah, of course. I too agree with that.
Because, sir, I read it long back and I can relate it here.
Yeah. So many, you see that they have denied certain prize, certain honor because of that. Because there are certain conditions. And they denied to accept that. Today, less students are participating in the discussion. Dev-Priya, Ananya, Aarti, Vinay Kumar, Devendra Kumar, Smriti, Ranjit, Manya, Shreya, Ayush, Muhammad Amil, Gauri, and Pragati.
Yes, sir.
Any query, anything? Just you add something. You people now add some. Or so what you got? What you just tell me that essence of today's understanding. What you got from today's talk? Because this is the last minute of the discussion.
Suppose. So being colonized is not just about like the suppression of the colonized people, but it is about the suppression of the culture also, and the traditional values which we are following. How are we told that the culture which we are following, or the aspects which we are seeing, is not up to the mark, or we can say it is somewhat the savage. It is not that savage as the one those who are following these white people caste, creed, and all the religion and cultural aspects and values. So this was the main. And last week I just went through that Chief Seattle speech, so I just extracted few points from there also,